Greetings, everybody, and welcome to today's VentureBeat webinar on the future of marketing, how mental health campaigns are driving brand perception and loyalty, brought to you by Latana. My name is Dave Clark. I'll be your host for this VB Live event. Before we get started, just a few quick notes. We want you to know that this will be a very interactive webinar today. If you have any questions for the speakers, we invite you to type them at any time into the Q&A panel on your screen. So get all of your questions in, and if your question is specific to one particular person, if you could, please be sure to indicate that person's name in your question. You'll also notice on your screen that in the handouts panel, you can access various resources associated with this webinar. So take a look when you have a chance. In fact, I think we have a boatload of resources in there for you today, a couple of PDFs, a couple of links, a lot of good stuff. Take a look. And I think that's everything you need to know for today. So why don't we get started with today's discussion on the future of marketing, how mental health campaigns are driving brand perception and loyalty. And let's begin by meeting our speakers. Alex Brands is head of brand marketing at Madhappy. Will Allen Mersch is partner at Spill. Angelie Mullins is CMO and CGO at Latana. And you can also see that Stuart Rogers is on your screen, but unfortunately, Stuart was not able to join us today. He was going to moderate today's webinar, but we're still going to give you a great conversation today. The show must go on. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves right now, and then we're going to get things started. So Alex, why don't you kick things off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, everybody. I'm Alex Brands. I'm the head of brand marketing at Madhappy, which is a lifestyle brand focused on creating conversation around mental health. Prior to my time at Madhappy, I was a strategy lead at an agency in New York called Gin Lane, where I focused on brand positioning for startups. Prior to that, I worked a little bit in advertising, but I'm really excited to be here and excited to chat about mental health and marketing.
Thank you so much, Alex. Let's move next to Will. Will, what can you tell us about yourself and the work you do?
Hi, everyone. I'm Will, and I'm a partner at Spill, which is a startup based in London. We help provide video therapy to employees of companies around the world. So we're on a mission to make it much easier for employees to access therapy sessions through just a few clicks. We do that through making it really easy with an integration that works with Slack and Microsoft Teams. I look after the kind of brand and marketing side of things at Spill. And before that, I came from a background in creative agencies. So kind of bringing a bit of that viewpoint to things as well.
Terrific. Thanks, Will. Let's move next to Angelie. How about you, Angelie? What can you tell us about yourself?
Hello. So I am the CMO and the CGO of Latana. And so we are a startup based in Berlin. We are a brand tracking and consumer insights platform. We help brands and companies around the world understand their audiences better, make better marketing decisions from those insights. I have a long history in marketing, brand, insights and growth. Prior to this, I was with companies like GoDaddy and Amazon. But what I'm really, really interested in is helping brands understand how do they connect with their audiences better? Who are their audiences? And sometimes those insights are actually really profound. So really happy to talk about mental health and campaigns today.
Great. Thanks, Angelie. And ladies and gentlemen, I have some great news for you. I said that our moderator, Stuart Rogers, was not able to join us, but Stuart is here. Stuart, why don't you introduce yourself? Really glad that you were able to join us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've been battling with technology, of course. Yeah, we're back. We're in. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Stuart Rogers. I'm with VentureBeat, and I have at VentureBeat previously been staff writer. I ran VentureBeat's research arm prior to this. I also speak all around the world and, of course, recently online about mental health in the tech industry and other mental health topics. So this is very, very close to my heart. I'm extremely happy to be here. And the fact that I'm here is going to keep my mental health well again, of course, and not cause me any strife or problems. So thanks, everyone, for bearing with me. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Stuart. And now that we have our full team with us today, we're going to get things started. And as I mentioned, Stuart, you're going to be moderating us through this webinar. So I'm going to hand it over to you now. Take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dave. So before we get started, just need to remind our audience, you can ask questions at any time, and please do. We'll keep hold of those questions. We'll get ready to ask those to all of our wonderful experts here at the end. So please, as we go through, and as I ask our wonderful panel so many awesome questions, if you've got something you want to say, pop it into the Q&A box. We'll keep it for the end, and we will ask those for you. Of course, if you, and David, I'm sure has said this, but if you want to direct a question to anyone in particular, just include that in your question as well. And of course, you've already seen you can grab handouts and everything else. So make sure you take advantage of the platform today. But without further ado, let's get into our questions. So the first thing that's on my mind is, obviously, we've had this little thing. It's called the global pandemic. Not sure if anyone's heard of it, but that has changed a lot of things. On my mind is this: why are mental health topics so important in 2021? Why are we focusing on them now where we previously maybe didn't? Will, could I ask you to answer that one first?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something I think about a lot. Someone who's both gone through mental health struggles and also who's involved with a business that was kind of formed in recent years, largely as a result of this. I think for me, the pandemic has kind of exacerbated and made clearer some of the mental health struggles we face. But I think it seems that they have been getting worse over the past kind of 10 or so years in particular. If we look at a lot of different mental health metrics, seems like over the period of the 2010s is when we've really seen some big rises in everything from anxiety and depression rates to self-harm rates, suicide rates, even just some kind of self-reported measures. If you look at things like, everyday satisfaction, happiness, some census measures like that, we've seen some dips across especially younger adults in the 2010s. So it seems like something about modern life has been kind of making everyone feel less good and has especially been exacerbating some of those more serious mental health conditions. To delve into why that is, I think we're looking at some kind of quite complex and structural issues. I think for me, one of the big things is the level of self-expectation people have on themselves has risen drastically. One of the stats that always shocks me is the percentage of people who would describe themselves as a very special person among young adults. It was 12% in the 1950s. It's now 80%. And, they say happiness is reality minus expectations. The big thing we've seen change in that formula is people's expectations dramatically shoot up. We've also seen a range of things change. Even before the pandemic, we've seen free, unstructured social time dramatically diminish. The amount of close personal friends people feel like they have has diminished again over the past kind of 30 years. Those kind of more traditional, I guess, community support fabrics in many places in the world also going down. So I think it's a really interesting, knotty answer. And to get to the bottom of it, I think we're dealing with some quite complex things. But I think what the pandemic, for me, has done is really kind of shine a spotlight on structural issues that were already underway and just make it easier, essentially, to talk about them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Anjali, can you add to that, please?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think it's something that has been in all of our minds. And like Will was talking about, it's really shining that light. I feel like it's a transition that everybody's been going through. And it's something that sometimes in life, when you push something aside and then things happen and it forces you to look at that. And so I think that's the thing that's really been happening is everybody's really been forced to look at this issue. It's been forced up front and center. And so I think that's what's made it really important and important to people, important to consumers. And of course, one of the things we're going to talk about further, how it's important to brands.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anjali. Alex, what can you add, please?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things we've seen is in the last 18 months, a big shift toward openness. And I think it's driven by two main factors. One is there are quite big generational differences in the way that millennials and Gen Z tend to interact with the internet. So I'm a millennial. When I first was granted access to the internet, it was like, be very careful what you put there because it's going to live there forever. And so it bred a generation of people who were curating very carefully what they put on their social media profiles, how they showed up on the web. And so in contrast to that, I think what you're seeing is the younger generation, Gen Z, is like much more open with what they're willing to share. And so if you go to TikTok, you go to the platforms that are more prominent with a younger audience, you're seeing a lot more real content of people going through it, whether it's anxiety or depression or a breakup or they're mourning something. It's much more real. And so that cultural shift has been coupled with factor 2, which is what Will spoke to very nicely, the pandemic. And so the pandemic did a lot of things, but I think one of the main things it did was that it gave the entire world a shared experience. And so you have billions of people going through one experience together. All of a sudden, it becomes a much more acceptable thing to start to talk about what you're going through, because everyone else understands what it means to be a mom or a student or an employee at this time. And so those two pieces, I think, are really creating an interesting environment where the conversation around mental health is starting to gain a lot of steam, and more people are feeling more and more comfortable opening up.
Excellent. Very good points from everyone. I absolutely agree with all of that. I mean, that leads me on, I guess, to my next sort of burning question, which is, how does mental health influence consumer decision-making and purchasing? Angeli, I know you have some interesting facts and figures for us on that.
Yeah, absolutely. But before I get into the facts and figures, I mean, like the rest of us were already talking about, consumer decision-making is all about what's front and foremost in people's minds. And so we see that shift happening now. And so it's really, really a huge, big influence. And that's really why it's at the forefront. But at the survey information that we get at Latana, we survey consumers all across the world. And we did a really cool survey in the United States. We surveyed over 1,000 consumers there. And a really cool factoid. So according to our data, almost 75% of people think that brands should be investing more time and money to support mental health initiatives. And it's really interesting because what you're seeing in some of these campaigns is you're not just seeing brands push their product anymore. You're seeing brands push a feeling or push a situation or even pushing a challenge to overcome. And they're using that to connect with consumers. So when you look 10, 20 years ago, it was all about, I have this great product, or even 10 years ago, I have this great piece of software, look at the features. Now it's all about, here's a situation as a consumer that you're going through in your life. Here's how we can connect with that. Here's how we acknowledge it. So it's a shift happening in the consumer mindset, and consumers are really allying with that shift. If you ally with the shift, you connect with your consumers. And of course, that's going to be the main thing that drives the purchasing decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Will, what have you got to say about this?
Yeah, I kind of echo a lot of what Angeli said. I think we know that consumers increasingly are giving more kind of headspace and credibility to the values that organizations have, and really the values that they're espousing and how those align with people's own values, but also, I guess, how brands can kind of help us on navigate our journey to become more closer to our idealized self. So I guess I don't just, use brands that exactly fit my values and where I am today. I kind of buy into brands in order to help me explore different parts of myself and kind of get closer to different aspects of myself I want to develop. And I think we've really seen that across a raft of kind of social issues, that the brands that are really credibly taking quite strong stances and appealing to those kind of deeper values elements are the ones that are able to create those deeper connections. And yeah, as Angeli said, we know that not only helps in purchase decision making, but in kind of longer term loyalty as well. One of my favorite studies on this topic, it was the Journal of Consumer Research experiment a couple of years ago, I think in 2017, where they got consumers to just look at a logo of a brand that they feel close to and feel that they share their values, and put their hand in ice water and report their pain score. They do the same when they're just looking at a neutral image or of a brand that they feel neutrally towards, and they literally report less felt pain when they're looking at a brand they feel close to. So I think it was just a really interesting example of how this is, this is not just stuff that's maybe tipping a tiny purchase decision in one brand's favor or another. Like, this is really having an impact on how people feel about brands and about how they see themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is super interesting to me because, personally, I've looked at mental health from all sorts of different angles, but this is a new angle for me. So I'm getting an awful lot from this already. Alex, what can you add, please?
Yeah, no, I think Will and Angeli both make great points. The idea that customers vote with their wallet is like a a prevailing sentiment that I think is starting to move more and more into the mind of more marketers. And so it's where are you supporting causes that your customer base cares about, and how are you linking that to what you're doing as a brand? I think over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, there's been a big move in the marketing world to shift toward emotional decision making, and shift from we're selling you on functional assets, or we're selling you on functionality and features, moving toward we're selling you on a feeling. And so I think you've seen that in the way that advertising has shifted, the way that commercials have shifted, the way that brands have acted. We've like, it's the people don't buy what you sell, they buy why you sell it, the whole Simon Sinek world. And so I think that has moved into the zeitgeist of how we think about marketing. Now the question is, how does that interact with mental health? And so I think it's really powerful when customers feel that you're doing what you say, and that you're, as a brand, standing for something and acting in the best interest of those values and of that mission. And so I think the other piece is that it's quite powerful for the consumer when there's social currency tied to the brand. So supporting a brand, and then as a consumer getting credit for supporting that brand, whether it's on a piece of clothing, or it's on a tote bag, or you get to show to your friends that you discovered something earlier than anyone else, that becomes a very mutually beneficial relationship between the brand and the consumer. And in that sense, there's a lot of power in that relationship. So I think it's very woven, the idea that mental health is starting to impact consumer decision making. And I think it happens both at an emotional level and then at a mission-based level.
Yeah, absolutely. This is remarkably interesting for me. Thank you so much, everyone, so far. I mean, next question really then is so many big brands are tackling mental health to drive open conversations on the topic. I mean, is this actually what consumers want? Angeli, please, can you give us a little bit of insight on that?
Sure. So I think it ties into the beginning of our discussion. Consumers at the heart, they're people. People, consumers, the same thing. So as we talk about, everybody has gone through this global pandemic. This issue of mental health has been front and center. Of course, this is what people have on their mind. This is what they're starting to shift their focus on now. And this is what has become really important to them. So of course, there's going to be brands driving open conversations. It's absolutely what consumers want. Before I go into some of the data we have, just think about the things that we've seen on the news. For example, Simone Biles in the gymnastics world, talking about taking a step back due to mental health. Naomi Osaka, in the sporting world, again, talking about not joining some PR conversations because of mental health. So you see this not just every day with your friends or your colleagues at work, but you see this in the news all the time. So again, people being consumers, some of the data that we were able to collect at Latana from our survey in the United States, over 64% of our respondents believe that brands should discuss mental health. And something that Alex was talking about, he was talking about the difference between Gen Z and millennials. So the 64% actually happened to be driven by millennials. And then some of our other data we were talking about is over 95% of people found that mental health and personal well-being is important to their everyday lives. And that was actually led by Gen Z. So really, really interesting. It's interesting to see how this shift is coming up with different generations, but it's also very, very high with the subsequent generations. So that's really interesting. And to dive a little deeper on what do they want, because everybody says that's great, but what does that really mean, especially for brands? So over 25% of our respondents, they really want brands and companies to take mental health differences into consideration when designing products, spaces, and services. So I thought that was really interesting. Another 25% wanted to break the taboo surrounding mental health. And this is a big one because for many years it's been a taboo. For many years it's been the topic that nobody discusses and people suffer in silence. And so it's really important for brands and companies to be able to open up that conversation. So again, absolutely what people want. And we have some other statistics talking about consumers wanting, brands to be more transparent about it, providing a platform for open discussions, and also even in some cases providing monetary donations, to different organizations that support it. So absolutely, it's what consumers, and I would say everyday people want.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, those are some really significant statistics in there, and some really quite surprising results. Alex, why don't you come in on that and tell me more?
Yeah, I think the stats are really fascinating when you think about it from a consumer's perspective. I think if I'm thinking about it as a marketer, I think the question is, okay, there's a big wave of conversation coming around mental health. Should our brand get involved? Is it time for us to engage in the conversation? And I think the answer there is it depends. So I think customers are smarter than they've ever been. And I think that they will sense when coming into a conversation like mental health, which is sensitive, is benefiting you as a brand and benefiting you as a company more so than it's benefiting them as a consumer. And so I think it's a sensitive topic that should be treated with a lot of respect. And so when you're entering the market, I think it's being very thoughtful about, does it make sense for our brand to be talking about mental health? Because if it steps into a territory where it feels inauthentic to be linking mental health conditions or mood or your state with a specific product, then I think it's really going to turn consumers off on a one-to-one basis. So it's like, hey, this brand is really trying to like push their way into a territory that they don't feel authentic to, as a means to gain me as a consumer, which doesn't feel good. And then I think the other thing is just being sensitive to what's happening in the market. So if every single brand all of a sudden starts talking about mental health, then your commercial breaks are going to get really heavy really quickly. And so it's thinking through what feels right for us. Does it mean going all the way into anxiety and depression? Does it mean broadening the definition of mental health and figuring out how we can relate to consumers on a number of different levels? So it's great to see that the customer base and customers around the world are excited for more of this conversation to happen. As brands, I think we have to be very thoughtful in the way that we approach it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have just had a note that you froze a little bit, Angela, when you were giving some of those stats. Do you mind, before I go to Will, just repeating the stats for everyone again?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So again, I mean, we took a survey over 1,000 people in the United States. So about 64% of the respondents there believe that brands should discuss mental health. And so millennials were leading that. In another particular survey question, we had over 95% of people found mental health and personal well-being important to them in their everyday lives. And that one was actually driven by Gen Z. And then we had some breakouts talking about 25% take mental health differences into consideration when designing products, spaces, and services. And another 25% want companies to break the taboo and the stigma and really make it an open conversation.
Thank you so much. So thank you for doing that. Appreciate that. And Will, would you like to weigh in on this question now?
Yeah, I think I would build on some of the stuff Alex was saying, that for me, when the question is kind of, is it something consumers want, or is it something that, as a brand, we should be weighing in? And I think it's kind of thinking about maybe like where we are as a culture in that kind of adoption curve. It obviously depends culture by culture. I think in some cultures, as a brand, coming in with a message that it's okay to talk about mental health could be genuinely quite new, even controversial. I think in some cultures now, there's been quite a lot of cultural messaging, including from brands, on that topic. And so if that is the case in the markets where you're operating, it might be perhaps thinking about how you could add a new angle or a nuance, like talking about how mental health might affect certain groups of people, or how it might intersect with certain times of life or certain other areas of life, mental health and finance, for example. And then I think also it's a case of sometimes once we're at the stage where maybe in certain cultures the discussion is slightly more normalized, what can be done about it? And I think we're seeing this in a lot of other areas. When we look at kind of sustainability, when we look at racial injustice, it's all good to kind of talk the talk, but I think consumers are increasingly also looking for brands, if they are going to be speaking about these issues, to be in some way, I guess, trying to weigh in. And I guess we saw that coming through in Angeli's data as well, with that last stat about consumers wanting to see brands making donations, or kind of actually tangibly putting their money where their mouth is a bit on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that kind of leads on really to, I mean, if we're going to talk about what brands are actually doing around mental health, I think what's a great thing to do is to maybe look at some of the best examples. I mean, what are good examples of campaigns that have treated this subject with respect, and that are having a positive effect for all parties? Alex, maybe you could give us some examples that you've seen.
Yeah, happy to. So I think when I give examples, I always like to start with how I'm defining success. And so I think in this case, to me, success around the mental health territory is much more about approachability than anything else. And so it's, are you advancing the conversation, and are you bringing more people into the conversation around mental health in a way that feels like they can participate and they're not going to be overwhelmed, especially when you're talking about a subject that's been stigmatized for so long. And so the two that I like to look at are Calm and Headspace. They're competitors, but they're both approaching the market in like quite different ways. So Calm is really interesting because they've been pulling people into meditation via other habits. So working their way through sleep, and introducing meditation in a way that almost positions them like an entertainment brand. So they pull in Harry Styles, they pull in LeBron James, they take cultural figures that you know and love, and they sort of utilize them as a partner to introduce the idea of mental health as a totally normal thing that the people that you love either engage with or struggle with or take care of in a new way. And so it's been a really interesting playbook on one side to see how Calm has approached the market. On the flip side, it's Headspace, which is they've been approaching it with what seems like a really wonderful mix of unexpected partnerships. So instead of pushing meditation on you, they're really pulling you in by focusing on elements of your day that are high stress. So for example, they partnered with airlines. If you know anyone who's an anxious flyer, it's a great place to be engaging with Headspace. Last week or 2 weeks ago, they just announced a partnership with Waze to help you find a more mindful way of commuting. And I think it's a super interesting way to approach it because if you think about like commuting is a massive factor and corollary with like daily stress. If your commute is like over a half hour or something like that, your like propensity to be chronically unhappy is much higher. And so the idea that they're injecting and offering opportunities to take those stressful moments of daily life and reduce them ever so slightly helps people take those baby steps toward a more mindful day and thinking about their mental health more actively. On top of that, here at Mad Happy, we've done a handful of out-of-home campaigns that I'm super proud of where we utilize ad space to just say positive mental health messages. So we took out, say, 50 billboards in LA in May that said, treat yourself like someone you love. And that was it. We weren't advertising any product. We weren't doing anything to benefit the brand in like a very functional way. It was much more, this is the time of year to remind you that you should be taking care of your mental health. And if you want help doing it, we're here.
Fantastic examples, and your own as well. I really like that. Thank you so much. So, Anjali, what are some great examples that you've seen?
Sure. I mean, our team here at Latana, we created an article about this. One of my favorite ones actually is Maltesers. So I don't know if you guys ever, back in the days when we actually went to go to the cinema in person and you could eat Maltesers in the cinema, but either way, they did a really great campaign in the UK called the Massive Overshare. And it was a billboard that they put up on buildings, and it was talking about mothers, and even in certain cases, fathers. After a baby is born, sometimes it's supposed to be, the happiest moment in people's lives. But in this case, a lot of people actually suffer depression, a lot of stress. It's a huge change. So their campaign, the Massive Overshare, and the billboard, absolutely just beautiful and really, really heartwarming, talking about, I only fell in love with my son after 6 weeks, longest 6 weeks ever. And so really just shining a spotlight. And this is about what we're talking about, of making it okay to talk about these types of topics, where normally in this case, you bring a new child, whether you have a baby or your adopted child, and it's supposed to be such a happy time, but a lot of people go through really, really stressful moments. And so acknowledging that and saying it's okay and just bringing that to the forefront. So we have tons of examples, but that's really one of my favorite ones because it takes something that people usually are suffering in silence and bringing it out to the forefront.
Thank you so much, Anjali. I know it's not a question, and I know it's not the end where we get to ask the audience questions. So remember, audience, you can ask questions anytime, but I have to just read out this comment from Jane. Thank you so much, Jane. It was, yay, Maltesers. I'm a Brit, but I live in the US. We don't get them here. Yeah, fantastic. Maybe we'll have to organise to send some Maltesers over to Jane, Will. I know you're in the UK, so maybe you can give us some examples that are a little bit more British. I don't know. And maybe you could send Jane some, some Maltesers.
Maybe I can arrange to post them while I'm here. Yeah, I can also give some examples from Britain. And I think following on from Anjali's point, one of my examples in a similar vein, which is Lloyds Bank. So one of the biggest banking chains in the UK, they had a campaign called the M Word, which was all about, I guess, breaking the taboo around talking about money problems. One of the biggest drivers amongst kind of everyday stress, even more deeper seated anxieties, especially for kind of men in their middle age, is kind of financial worries. And they did this really nice campaign all around kind of trying to break this taboo around the M word, which is money, and how, you know, a lot of the times we feel like we can talk to our friends about nearly anything, but money for some reason still can be quite a difficult issue and quite a kind of loaded issue as well. So a really nice kind of campaign to encourage conversations about that. But what I really liked was they also kind of backed it up by actually offering tangible support too. So they partnered with Relate, who are a counselling charity, and actually offered people free kind of online phone counselling sessions to talk about those money issues as well. And it was something they did to all of their current customers as well as an external facing campaign. So really, really kind of like starting with the bread and butter as well as kind of going out and promoting that message. So I really loved that one. Another one that came recently, actually, it was World Mental Health Day a couple of weeks ago. And Moonpig, who are a really big European card retailer, did an awesome campaign where they just let anyone send a free card to someone to let them know they were thinking about them. I thought that was a really bold statement because it's quite a big financial kind of potential write down, right? You're potentially giving away a bunch of free cards. And I think it taps in really nicely to that idea that often, especially when we're concerned about people or we're not sure how they're doing, it can be hard to reach out and just call them. And a card can be a really nice kind of lower commitment, gentler way to kind of open up that conversation and let people know that we are thinking about them. So I loved that one. And then my final one was Ford Trucks, who had a really nice campaign specifically aimed at middle-aged men. And it was called The Elephant in the Transit Van. And it was kind of getting them to, I guess, talk about mental health. And it was based on this really nice statistic that people find it easier to talk about difficult topics when they're not facing each other. So when they're both facing in the same direction. And I think this was a really nice kind of human insight, right? Like I've had really difficult conversations with people in the car. There's something about being distracted and not looking and having that eye contact that can make it easier to broach a topic. So I really loved them for such a lovely insight. And also to me, I thought that was a bold campaign because if you look at, I guess, a slightly older male demographic, it's not the demographic that we're necessarily hearing from the data are crying out for brands to talk more about mental health. That seems to be slightly more millennials, Gen Zs. So for me, like, it's not necessarily something that is as rooted in the consumer data, but we know that especially in middle age, that's when a lot of mental health issues for men can be, the risk is highest. So for me, it was kind of, they were willing to do this campaign to an audience who they thought most needed to hear it, rather than to an audience who had vocally said they looked for that in brands. So might not work as necessarily as well from a brand point of view, but I think really, really kind of credible and really, really a great campaign in my view.
Excellent. I love all of those examples. Thank you so much. Not just the Maltesers, but yeah, I agree with Maltesers. They're fantastic. But yeah, all of those are fantastic and really inspirational. Look, I mean, working in the brand and the mental health space yourselves, I mean, how do you think companies should approach mental health marketing? Alex, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, happy to. I think the broad answer is thoughtfully. This is a highly sensitive topic, and just like politics, everyone has an opinion on mental health. Everyone has a relationship to it, whether it's because they've had an experience through someone else, or whether it's because they have their own experience with mental health, whether it's that they don't feel comfortable talking about it, or that they've experienced mental illness or struggled with a condition in the past. And so I think language is super important in the way that you approach your consumer. It's very, very key that you're positioning how you're thinking about mental health as a brand in a very nuanced and sensitive way. I would highly, highly encourage anyone who's stepping into this world to talk to therapists, talk to counselors, talk to people who work in this world full time, because they'll be able to lend you a lot of insight into how to approach topics and how to make sure that you're creating an experience that has the intended outcome. I think for us, one of the biggest things we've learned in putting together mental health campaigns is that they're most powerful when they become a vessel for the consumer, not they become the point in and of themselves. So it's like thinking through how to give someone space to feel instead of telling them how they should feel. And I think when we create those types of campaigns and we create those types of opportunities for consumers, audience members, community members to come engage with us, I think they leave with like a very powerful experience, and we leave having bettered the relationship with that individual. And the reason I say community members is because in a lot of the ways that we think about these campaigns, it's not only for customers. You don't have to buy to participate. Like, we're out here trying to forward the conversation, whether or not you purchase a hoodie. It's about you being a part of our community and helping us forward that mission.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, Anjali, what can you say to this?
I would just say companies need to open the door. I mean, how should brands approach mental health marketing? They need to start. Open the door. It's okay. So all the examples that both Will and Alex have shared, fantastic examples. And in the case that Will was talking about, doing a campaign to middle-aged males who may not have actually said anything, it's just saying that it's okay to do it. And I think that's the hurdle that, we really need to overcome. And this whole pandemic, everything everyone's gone through, like I said, it's made everything front and foremost in people's minds. And people are now starting to question, yeah, it is okay to talk about that. Yes, we do have shared experiences. Yes, this is important. And it is a good thing to talk about. So I think that's the best thing that companies can do. I also like what Alex said is, if you have everyone talking about it at once, it can be too much. Also, if you have brands just trying to slap a campaign together just to make a connection for no reason, it can also seem, completely disingenuous. So, open the door, be real, be honest, but at least make sure that you've considered it, the topic.
Yeah, very, very good points. And couldn't agree more. Thank you, Anjali. Will, tell us more, please.
Yeah, I think I would build on that point around really the credibility of the connection. So I think for me, there needs to either be some connection to the audience. So like in the Ford case, or I guess if your brand is predominantly looking at Gen Z and millennials, who we know it's very important for, or there needs to be a case to be made that it's relevant to the product. So like with Lloyds Bank, we know that finances are very, very tied up with mental health. So trying to, I guess, find that credible bridge between the two. For me, I think some aspect of walking the walk as well, or at least being prepared to walk the walk. I think it's best not viewed as, we'll just dabble and do one little campaign and that's it. Like, for me, consumers are too smart now. They have too many research tools at their disposal. They can know everything about a company in 30 seconds if you just give them a phone. So I think at least being willing to invest in walking the walk a bit, whether that's making donations or your internal policies or connections with a charity, or even like Alex said, just engaging with the mental health community, talking to people who've gone through poor mental health, talking to counselors and therapists. And then I think my final point would be, especially for multinational global brands, just really thinking about each individual market and how the language and how it's framed might drastically differ in how it resonates in different markets. You know, the way we talk about anxiety in the States, very different from how we might currently be talking about anxiety in different countries. So just speaking to people in the market, speaking to therapists in the markets, and making sure that the way we are portraying and framing this stuff makes sense for, I guess, some of the associations that are had in that culture as well.
Yeah, very, very good points. Thank you so much. We've got a couple more questions, and then I want to get into the audience questions. So, audience, this is your chance. You've got a little bit of time left to pop a question in. Please put it in there, and we've got a couple already come in, and I'm sure there'll be more. But you still have time to ask a question, so go ahead and do that. But before we do that, I've got some more burning questions as well. So 2 more at least, I think. Next one for me really is what have your companies been doing to offer support around mental health, and what other examples of good practices have you heard of? Anjali, maybe you could take that one away.
Absolutely. So at Latana, we've actually initiated a couple of different things that's really successful. The first one, and I'll say because today is Wednesday, every Wednesday at our company, we have what's called a focus day. And it's a day with no meetings. And it's extremely important. And I myself, I have to say, I'm one of the worst when it comes to meetings. You can ask everybody that I work with. I do all these back-to-back meetings, and it can be absolutely exhausting. And then at the end of the day, you're thinking, did you get any work done? And then all the stress and the mental pressure. So it was a really great initiative by the team at our company to institute one day where there's no meetings and you can focus. And what we found is that people were more productive. The work was done much better. People were able to actually communicate with each other. And then the meetings that they do have are actually much more productive there. So that's one of the things that we do that's really, really great. The other thing, which I think Will could probably speak about a little bit as well, is we actually use the Spill app. So a mental health app where you can actually schedule an appointment with therapists. And at first, when we introduced it into our company, we were thinking, is anybody going to use this? Are they going to feel a little weird about, scheduling this? Is anyone work going to know this kind of thing? But everybody got over that hurdle super, super fast. Everybody loves it. And sometimes you just need somebody to speak to. And so it's really nice to have that third party. And it's really also nice that a company introduces that benefit because it also is, again, saying that it's okay. And again, opening the door and making sure that people understand that. So those are some of the things that we're doing at Latana.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think one of the things I often speak about in my mental health keynote is the difference of, if you say to your friends, oh, I've got a personal trainer, they say, oh, that's great. If they're good, can you refer me, please? And if you say to them, oh, I've got a new therapist, they say, why? What's wrong with you? And we should be having the same response for I've got a new therapist as to I've got a new personal trainer. So it's good to flip that script and make sure that we do offer people that kind of support and assistance, but also just make it like a normal part of the support that you offer as a company. I think that's fantastic. Will, would you like to come in on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think we also obviously have Spill at Spill. We use our own product. I think one of the things we also think is really important is, I guess, making sure managers are trained to know about what the signs of poor mental health look like how to spot them, and then how to engage in conversations and I guess help point people towards support if it is there. That's, I think, so key. A couple of other things we do, a bit like Anjali, we survey our employees every quarter on psychological safety. And for me, that's such an interesting thing because it's maybe not specifically about more traditional forms of poor mental health, but working in a psychologically unsafe environment is one of the best predictors for feeling anxious or stressed and that spiraling downwards. So it's a really interesting set of questions that basically ask people do you feel safe speaking up? Do you feel like your employees have your back? Do you feel like anyone would purposely try to pull the rug from under you? And it's just a really interesting and great way to kind of pick up on when accidentally you might need more support in a certain area, or you might need to put more effort into kind of helping people feel like they can always speak up. So I think that's a really kind of good preventative one. And then a couple of things, a bit like Anjali, we have something called a right to disconnect policy, which basically means that after 7 p.m, if you want to work, that's fine. But if you want to send messages on Slack or via email, we just ask that people schedule them for the next day so that there isn't this idea that everyone's always online and working in the evening. We're also just super bullish about holiday. We have a minimum holiday day allowance of 25 days a year, and it's a company KPI. So we have our business KPIs, and then we also have, has everyone taken their minimum holiday? And if they haven't, like, we don't get our company like rewards for the year. So we try to actually build into the fabric of the business. Essentially, it's kind of like a well-being KPI, right? Because I think one of the things we know about business is if something is not measured, it doesn't get as much love and attention as it should do. So we're trying to kind of really codify that into core business metrics, basically.
Excellent. Alex, this is your chance to come in on this one as well.
Yeah. Just to build on something Will said. So psychological safety is also a massive driver in performance. So like environments that have high psychological safety tend to be much more high performing environments because it gives people the opportunity to speak up when there are problems. And if you can talk through them, then you can fix them, which is a really interesting correlation. But back to the question. So we think of Madhappy as a clothing brand, but it's also a platform for creating conversation around mental health. So when we look at what we're building as an ecosystem, there's the clothing piece, but we've also got the Local Optimist, which is a mental health platform that is entirely dedicated to mental health content. So articles, interviews, resources, toolkits, and we put 3 to 5 stories out a week. So we're continuing to foster the conversation that way. And on top of that, as an extension of the Local Optimist, last year we introduced the TLO hotline, which is a counselor that we have in-house that operates the hotline 3 days a week, where you can text in for free anything you're going through that's not a crisis. So if you're mourning a loss, going through a breakup, having a tough time at school, anything in between, you can come to us and we can text back and forth, and we can provide you with resources and support and guidance on whatever it is you're going through. And then on top of that, I think we think about product through the lens of mental health. So earlier this year, we introduced the Madhappy Journal. So it's very much an entry-level journal to get you to understand how journaling can be good for your mental health. It comes with 3 prompts a day that rotate, and they really give you an opportunity to engage with your thoughts, actions, and feelings. And so it's the same fundamentals as cognitive behavioral therapy, but sort of in a 101, much more approachable way. And it's been really cool to see our audience's reaction there. It's one of our best-selling SKUs of the year. And people are really yearning for tools that they can integrate into their daily routines that help their mental health. So like I mentioned, we try to make it a big part of our campaigns. So the out-of-home campaigns that are focused on just making sure people feel a little bit of optimism in their day or a little bit better. And some bigger partnerships on the mental health side. We work with the Jet Foundation a lot. And on top of that, we just struck a deal with the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center. And so we worked with them to devise an academic grant that's going to help improve mental health on campus, not only in the US, but also in the UK and in India. So it's a really cool program they're working on. They're putting together digital tools for students all over the world. And so we're really thrilled to be able to help and support their work.
Awesome. I'm getting so inspired by all 3 of you. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm loving the conversation. I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to get to the audience Q&A. So audience, you do have one last chance just to pop something in if there's anything on your mind. So let me ask this. In addition to marketing campaigns, many companies are better at supporting their staff in terms of mental health. How can actions like this impact the external perception of a brand? So maybe, Will, you could kick us off on that one.
Yeah, I think this is something we've seen, especially over the past kind of couple of years, has really been a bunch of high-profile brands and companies taking quite like big and progressive steps in terms of what they're doing to support staff's mental health, which is in turn kind of making headlines. So we saw Bumble, for example, give all of their staff a week off to help prevent burnout. I mean, you could argue the opposite and think, why do you need to give your staff a week off if the working conditions day to day are so good? That's a whole other kind of conversation to have. We've seen kind of extremely generous allowances around, everything from sick leave for mental health to kind of extended parental leave, even some, menopausal leave policies. And I think what we're really seeing here in terms of how it affects external is that, we're seeing a lot of social networks, LinkedIn, for example, where we're really seeing the cross of kind of employees and consumers. I mean, employees are just consumers, but I think a lot of these stories, especially now, we're looking at kind of the Great Resignation. Obviously, lots of people moving jobs, employer brands becoming more important than ever. And so I think we're really seeing a kind of crossover. And some of these are almost like marketing campaigns, essentially, in terms of the press and eyeballs and impact that they're having on people.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, what can you say? What can you say about this?
Yeah, I think it's super important to be building a strong employer brand and thinking about your brand as it pertains to employees as much as it pertains to customers. To Will's point, they're one and the same in some cases. I mean, just as we were talking about customers being smarter than ever, the same thing is true. Employees are smarter than ever. And I think when you're thinking about your brand and how you act, it's really about minimizing the gap between what you say and what you do. And so if you're out here putting on mental health campaigns, talking about how much you're behind improving mental health for your customers, but you're not doing it for your employees, people are going to find out and customers are going to know, employees are going to know. And I think the same is true even internally. It's like to the degree that you are prioritizing mental health in the way that you speak to your employees, in the way that it's a part of the values that are on the wall, it's much more about, are you acting and living those values? And so I think especially as it relates to a younger employer set, the tolerance for that gap between what you say and what you do being large is very low. And so you're going to want to continue to think through what you can do to back up what you say and how that in the end will improve your relationship with not only your employees, but also your customers.
Excellent. And before I get to ask the audience questions, Anjali, please take us to the end of this section.
I would just say for this particular question, I mean, happy employees create happy customers. The way that you treat your employees, that relates all the way to your customers. That's the way the employees treat your customers. So it's one and the same.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So as promised, we're going to get some audience questions in first. So we got a question from Kawana. Kawana asked, going back to where we were looking at good examples across the industry, Kawana asked if we had a good example across the beauty industry with the integration of mental health. Anjali, I know you know one of those. We talked about it prior.
Yes, so our team actually put together an article about all kinds of different companies, and specifically in the beauty industry, there's one about Maybelline, so a very well-known cosmetics and beauty brand, and they had one in the United States called Brave Together. And so I'm sure people, know Maybelline is targeting girls aged 14 to 24. That's their target demographic, and they're really trying to put together a campaign here to tackle and support anxiety and depression, because it's something that both girls and boys go through, but especially there's a lot of social pressure on young women in the beauty industry. And what does beauty mean? And what does that look like? And of course, it really goes to the heart of these girls' self-esteem and their personal image. So a really, really important topic. So this particular campaign called Brave Together, what they did is they put together this Brave Together website. And instead of featuring your typical models for their Maybelline ads, they actually featured young women and put together real stories of their struggles with mental health, how they overcame that. And also what Maybelline did is they, of course, talked about, different services and providers that can help these young women as well. So it's actually a trend that we're starting to see in the marketplace, not just with beauty industry, but with all kinds of industries. not just using typical models or celebrities, actors, etc., but using stories of real people and how they're overcoming real issues. And that's really what's resonating and connecting with consumers.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to check with Alex or Will if you have a beauty brand example, but if not, we'll get to the next question.
I've got one which is quite similar. It's Dove, and they have something called the Self-Esteem Project, similarly focused on young girls and teenagers, basically looking to help build body confidence in them. Dove also very famous for kind of featuring women of all shapes and sizes quite early on in the kind of journey of the beauty industry. But they do a few things through that Self-Esteem Project that are quite interesting. They actually help put on body image and self-esteem workshops in schools for girls kind of ages between 7 and 13. They also struck a partnership with Cartoon Network, which is like a popular cartoon channel in the UK, and basically helped essentially advise some of the script writers on how they can, I guess, weave some honest discussions of body image and kind of create more realistic and inspiring role models in the cartoons that a lot of these young girls are looking up to. So I thought kind of less of a campaign and more just of a kind of foundation or project behind the scenes that's trying to, I guess, help out a bit specifically in this demographic of young and teenage girls.
Excellent. Thank you, Will. Alex, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask another question because we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we get this in. I mean, first of all, thank you very much to Jane for interacting so much. I'm pretty sure Will's going to send you some more teasers. You talked about blues washing earlier, and there's a part of one of your questions I really want to pose here. Blues washing. We know what that is. It's just like greenwashing and every other type of washing, where literally people are just, kind of doing the bare basics or pretending to do something just for the kudos. Do you? I mean, great examples of companies avoiding this, and you've been giving great examples all the way through. But do you have any guidelines or principles that you use to advise brands wanting to step into this area in a meaningful, authentic way and avoid blues washing? Maybe Angela, you could speak to that.
I would say the best thing that you can do is just use real stories and be authentic. That's probably the best thing. It's very difficult when you talk about topics with mental health. You can stray, and just like how you have greenwashing with sustainability, and you can just say, okay, attach something. To your brand and to your campaign and what you're selling. The same thing can happen with blues washing. So I would just say, be honest, use real stories, find the right moments. And I think that's the absolute, if you can just go with that guideline, you will do right every single time and people will feel the authenticity.
Thank you so much. Alex, what can you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's dead on. I think it's thinking through what it means for you and your brand. And how it manifests in the lives of your consumers. So when you look at the relationship that your brand has with your consumer, it's thinking through what role do we play in someone's life? And does it make sense for us to integrate mental health into that conversation? And so for some brands, the answer will be yes. It's totally natural for us to be taking that step. For other brands, the answer is going to be no. And I think as marketers, it's going to be up to you to say, hey, this train is leaving the station, but it's not for us to get on. We should be focusing on other things. We should be focusing on other social issues that make more sense for who we are, who our customers are, and the relationship that we have together. I think about it the way that you have like different people who play different roles in your life, right? So like my mom bringing up mental health is one thing because we have a very distinct relationship. The cashier on the way out of the grocery store bringing up mental health is a very different relationship. And so if it's shoehorned in there in a way that doesn't feel good, it'll definitely feel strange for the end consumer. And so I think it's really thinking critically about whether it makes sense for you and not feeling like you have to play because other brands are playing.
Excellent. Will, we don't have long left, but I'd love to make sure that you give us the footnote on this incredible webinar.
A short and sweet answer. I think, yeah, building on everything those guys have said, I would say try to like drill down beneath mental health as a broad topic and find like a specific, unique, ideally problem that your brand can really help to have some impact on. So whether that's, you know, self-esteem for young girls on body image, or whether that's kind of middle-aged men talking about financial issues, kind of really try and drill down and find a gap that you could genuinely help in which to make a shift. And then, as Alex said, I think once you've got an idea for that gap, the best thing you can do is talk to people, talk to experts, talk to academic experts in the field, bring them in and sense check this before you kind of put it out there to consumers.
I have to say, I've done so many of VentureBeat's webinars, possibly over 1 million. This was absolutely one of my favorites because, and in fact, one of our live audience, Jane, said this as well. You've been so incredibly sincere, and you've inspired me. I'm sure you've inspired everybody that's watching live. Thank you all, and everyone that's watching on demand. Really appreciate all of your amazing insights. And back to Dave to wrap up today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Stuart, and a big thanks to all of our speakers today for all of their insights. Alex Brands, Will Allen Mersch, Angela Lee Mullins, and of course our moderator, Stuart Rogers. Thanks also to Latana for making today's event possible. Just a few quick final notes to wrap up here. Today's webinar was recorded, and you'll be receiving an email with a link to access that recording when it's available, so check your inboxes for that. Also, in just a moment, a very brief survey will appear on your screen. You'll be able to rate this webinar on a 5-star scale and also provide us with comments and feedback, so please take a couple of moments to let us know what you thought about today's webinar. And finally, a reminder that today's webinar is copyright 2021 by VentureBeat. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by VentureBeat, which is responsible for their content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Thanks so much for being with us today. That does conclude today's VB Live event. Have a great day.